Dragon Age Origins is often hailed as one of BioWare's finest achievements and, to some, one of the greatest RPGs ever made. 14 years after its release, I finally decided it was time to experience this classic for myself. Not just to see if those accolades were deserved, but to ask whether it still holds its ground amidst the stellar RPGs which have since redefined the genre. So join me as I talk about the highs, the lows, and all the goodness in between of this truly wonderful game. I chose to play as a Dalish elf, and little did I know how much this choice would shape my experience from the very beginning. Each origin story not only introduces the game's mechanics, but immerses you in the world through the unique lens of your character's background. As a Dalish, I was immediately surrounded by rich world-building. Stories of the elven gods, the rise and fall of Arlathan, and our people's subjugation by the humans. Even within this brief introduction, the game masterfully weaves a tapestry of culture and identity. I felt a genuine sadness when it came time to leave with Duncan, and were told we'd likely never see our clan again. Not long after, I arrived at Ostagar and met my first true companion, the one and only Alistair. At first, I wasn't entirely sold on him. His quippy and jovial personality seemed at odds with the dark and brooding tone the game had established up until that point. That uncertainty didn't last very long, however, as I quickly grew to absolutely adore him. Shortly after, we ventured into the Korcari wilds to recover the Grey Warden treaties. It was there that we met Morrigan. Her sharp wit and biting cynicism clashed spectacularly with Alistair's playful demeanor. While the early hours of the game had their highlights, everything changed for me during the Battle of Ostagar. Up until then, the Darkspawn were a looming threat, rather than an immediate one. We'd seen a few in the intro and some in the Korcari wilds, but the true scale of their menace hadn't yet hit home. That was all about to change. The tension was palpable as we gathered by the roaring bonfire at the heart of Ostagar. Duncan refused my pleas to join the fight, tasking us instead with lighting the beacon at the Tower of Ishal, a seemingly minor duty far removed from the front lines. Then, the screen faded to black, and what followed was one of the most breathtaking battle sequences I've ever witnessed in a video game. The cinematic begins with a slow build, every frame dripping with tension. Soldiers brace themselves, ready to lay down their lives. King Cailan strides into view in his golden armor, Duncan by his side, and then the enemy appears. Thousands of Darkspawn surge forwards, snarling and roaring, a relentless tide of chaos. The camera pans to the front lines, lingering on a trembling soldier as the reality of what's coming sinks in both for him and for us. As a lifelong RPG fan, I've seen my fair share of epic battles, but nothing quite like this. The scale was staggering. Individual models clashed on screen, each moving with a sense of purpose and individuality. It felt more like watching the Battle of Helm's Deep from the Two Towers rather than playing a game. I wouldn't be surprised if that scene did inspire the team at BioWare. Then, just as seamlessly as it all began, the game shifts back to gameplay. The Tower of Ishal awaits, and scaling it feels urgent and frantic, a race against time. At the top, we face our toughest foe yet, an ogre. The fight is grueling, but we emerge victorious. We light the beacon and breathe a sigh of relief, only for that relief to be snatched away. The cutscene resumes as Loghain Muktir sees the beacon flare and retreats. The betrayal is shocking. A gut punch that reframes the entire battle. Suddenly, the Darkspawn aren't the only threat to Ferelden. The first half of the sequence had firmly established the Darkspawn as an existential danger, and now the second half introduces an equally sinister human antagonist. My mind raced with questions. Was this a power play? Is he in league with the Darkspawn? But the game doesn't give you long to dwell on those questions. We cut back to the battlefield where King Cailan meets his tragic end at the hands of an ogre. Having just fought one ourselves, we know exactly how terrifying they are. His death is brutal, unceremonious, and devastating. Duncan, ever the stoic hero, takes down the beast that killed his king, but cannot turn the tide of the battle. The camera lingers on him as he gazes at the lit beacon, perhaps taking solace in the knowledge that we succeeded. And then the battle was lost. In the aftermath, we discover that Flemeth had saved us from the tower. Now, alongside Morrigan, we must journey across Ferelden, not only to confront the Darkspawn, but to navigate the political web spun by Loghain's betrayal. BioWare had masterfully set the stage, layering conflict, intrigue, and stakes. It's astonishing to think that this was only the opening chapter of a brand new franchise. In just 30 minutes, the game sold me completely on its narrative and left me desperate to see what would come next. Player agency is the cornerstone of a great RPG. It's the difference between feeling like a tourist in someone else's world versus feeling like an integral part of its story. On one end of that spectrum, there are games like Skyrim, where you can go anywhere, do anything, and forge your own path. But while the freedom is exhilarating, the world often feels shallow. Your actions rarely ripple out to affect NPCs or events in meaningful ways. On the other end, there's Baldur's Gate 3. Without spoiling anything, even the smallest of decisions in Act 1 can set off a chain reaction that spirals throughout the rest of that game. So where does Dragon Age Origins fall on that spectrum? Do your decisions truly matter? Does your character's origin have a tangible impact on the story? Or is it the dreaded all roads lead to Rome situation that we've seen in the Telltale series? From the very beginning, Dragon Age Origins answers these questions emphatically. The Dalish origin didn't just influence my character's backstory, it shaped how the world responded to me. From small moments like being mistaken for a city elf servant by Ostagar's blacksmith, a moment drenched in passive racism he quickly backtracks on, to profound ones like the warmth I received when meeting the Dalish elves over in the Brazilian forest. That reunion felt like a mini homecoming, despite it not being the clan from which I hailed, a stark contrast to the ridicule and cold shoulders I'd faced in human settlements. What truly sets Origins apart is how seamlessly it weaves your origin into dialogue and decision-making. You're deep in a branching conversation when suddenly a unique response tied to your background appears, or an NPC references your Dalish heritage unprompted. It never felt forced or heavy-handed. BioWare wasn't nudging me with an elbow saying, "Hey, see what we did there?" It never feels forced. Instead, these moments felt natural and immersive, keeping me invested in my character. Even 100 hours into the game, the dialogue remained engaging and responsive, a testament to the developer's commitment to player agency. But it wasn't just the dialogue. My actions carried a weight, often in ways I didn't fully grasp until much later. Take my journey to the Circle of Magi after leaving Lothering. There, I defended the mages against a demonic incursion, ultimately defeating Uldred. During the climactic battle, I used the Litany of Adrala to save the first enchanter Irving. Had I failed, Irving would have perished, forcing me to side with the Templars, enabling them to enact the Rite of Annulment. Instead, my choices restored the Circle and earned the Magi's allegiance. Hours later, in the basement of Redcliffe Castle, I encountered Ioan, the apostate mage who had poisoned Al-Aemon at Loghain's behest. His involvement was messy, hired by Isolde to tutor her son Connor in magic. His actions had spiraled out of control. When Ioan pleaded for redemption, my companions weighed in. Alistair, with his Templar ideology, opposed Ioan, while Morrigan, an apostate herself, urged me to trust him. Their interjections added nuance to the moment, grounding it in their perspectives and beliefs. I chose to free Ioan, trusting his remorse and willingness to make amends. That decision led to one of the most impactful moments of my playthrough. In Redcliffe's Great Hall, I then faced Connor, or rather, the demon possessing him. My failed diplomacy led to a battle, one in which victory left us no closer to freeing Connor. It is then that Ioan appears with a solution. We must venture into the Fade and slay the demon therein. The only caveat being we would need lyrium or a human sacrifice to journey there. Isolde was willing to offer her life in exchange for her son's freedom. As a new parent, I felt the weight of her sacrifice deeply but couldn't accept it. Then, the game reminded me of my earlier choices. A new dialogue pointed me to the Circle of Magi, who owed me a favor for having saved Irving. I rushed back to the tower and pleaded my case. Irving, grateful for my earlier actions, agreed without hesitation. With the mage's help, we returned to Redcliffe and no one had to die. The only decision left was who to send into the Fade to confront the demon. Despite Irving's reluctance, I trusted Ioan to rise to the challenge. What followed was a harrowing journey through the Fade, culminating in the demon's defeat and Connor's salvation. In the aftermath, Isolde and Tegan asked for my judgment on Ioan. I vouched for him, securing his freedom. Al-Aemon, once recovered, sentenced Ioan to the Circle rather than the execution he would have otherwise faced. This single quest encapsulates everything that makes Dragon Age Origins extraordinary. Outcomes aren't predetermined. They hinge on your decisions, both big and small. What if I hadn't saved Irving? What if I hadn't freed Ioan? What if I hadn't earned the Circle's trust? Each choice shaped the story, making the world feel alive and reactive. For me, this quest was the highlight of my playthrough. It showed me how deeply I cared about these characters, not because the game told me to, but because their fates weren't foregone conclusions. The stakes felt real, and my choices carried meaningful consequences. In that moment, I wasn't just playing a game, I was shaping a story, one decision at a time. Origins markets itself as a dark fantasy, and while I was initially skeptical, by the time the credits rolled, I was fully convinced. This isn't a world of whimsical magic or valiant heroes triumphing over evil. Instead, despair, cruelty, and moral ambiguity permeate every corner of Thedas. The game doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths, and it's this unflinching approach that makes the world feel so authentic. Take, for example, the revelations about the werewolves in the Brazilian forest. Initially, they're presented as monsters terrorizing the Dalish elves, but the truth is far more tragic. These werewolves are the descendants of a human tribe cursed by Zathrian centuries ago, their crime being the murder of his son and the rape of his daughter. Or consider the alienage in Denerim, where Loghain's deal with Tevinter slavers reveals the stark disregard Ferelden's elite have for its marginalized elven population. And then there's the Broodmother. Encountering one for the first time, paired with Hespith's haunting poem, is an experience I won't soon forget. The grotesque transformation of woman into these creatures stripped of agency and humanity is horrifying in its cruelty. These moments are undeniably grim, but they're also grounded. Strip away the fantasy elements and what remains are crimes and sins that sadly echo our own world. It's this grounding that makes the game's darkness feel earned rather than gratuitous. Our introduction to the Grey Wardens paints them as the archetypal heroes of the story, but their reality is far from glamorous. From the beginning, the joining ritual, a process that kills many recruits, is a stark reminder of the cost of their heroism. And even for those who survive, the victory is hollow. The tainted blood coursing through their veins acts as a ticking time bomb, guaranteeing they'll succumb to madness within 30 years. Their only solace lies in wading into the deep roads, cutting down as many darkspawn as possible before falling in battle. The Grey Warden's role in ending a blight is equally grim. Slaying an archdemon requires a warden to serve as a vessel for the old god's soul, resulting in their complete annihilation. It's a fate befitting a hero, but one steeped in tragedy. Beyond Ferelden, the larger world of Thedas exists tantalizingly on the periphery. It's inaccessible yet constantly alluded to, offering glimpses of a broader context. The interplay of its cultures, the wandering elves, the mountain-dwelling dwarves, and the hierarchical humans might sound tropey, but Origins manages to add enough twists to keep them fresh and intriguing. What surprised me most was how often the game positioned me as the arbiter of morally complex conflicts. In the Brazilian forest, the sins of the father storyline is Origins at its best. I empathized with Zathrian's grief and rage, but also saw the werewolves as victims of a centuries-old injustice. Resolving the conflict diplomatically, freeing the werewolves while curing the Dalish, felt immensely satisfying. It wasn't just the best outcome, it required both careful negotiation and, admittedly, a little bit of luck. Contrast that with the power struggle over in Orzammar between Balin and Harrowmont. The Dwarven caste system and Paragon legacy created a fascinating backdrop for their succession conflict. Here, I felt woefully unprepared to make an informed decision. Much of what I learned about the two contenders was secondhand, rumors, hearsay, and embellished tales from dwarves with their own agendas. Attempts to engage directly with Balin or Harrowmont about their policies were thwarted by their absence. I sided with Harrowmont during the proving, believing him to be the more honourable candidate. Yet by the time of the coronation, I'd changed my mind, throwing my support behind Balin in the hope that he might reform the caste system and lead Orzammar into a new era. Hope is the key word. I never felt confident in my decision. In hindsight, I wondered if playing as a dwarf might have granted me more insight into Orzammar's political web. Speaking of the dwarves, let's talk about lyrium, magic in the Fade. While other fantasy worlds may have explored similar ideas, this was my first encounter with a system quite like this. The dwarves' inability to wield magic, paired with their ability to hear the lyrium singing, fascinated me. It raised questions about what fundamentally separates them from the humans and the elves. And then there's the Codex entry on the Maker, which describes the Golden City in the Fade as having streets made of music, a beautiful thematic connection to the dwarf's relationship with lyrium, and the Maker's involvement in sharing the gift of magic with his children. Of all the Codex entries, my favourite one had to be Karadin's journal, which offers us a glimpse into the visionary's grimdark and horrific experiments upon his own people. To quote a part of his journal, "These brave warriors come to me, naked as the day they were born. I dressed them in a skin of armor, so large it makes the burliest look no more than a babe. The anvil, their first and final cradle. We are surrounded by a mile of earth on all sides. No one hears the screams as I pour molten lyrium through the eye holes, the mouth, every joint and chink in the armor they silence quickly. but the smell lingers. Just a trace of blood in the greater stench of hot metal. I must work fast. The armor is malleable now as I shape it with hammer and tongs. It is not long before it moves beneath my hands, writhing and twisting with every blow. It speaks again, a low moan, but I've learned to tune it out. I can afford no error in this craft. There can be no melted slag blinding the eyes, nor an unhoned bit of granite shackling the leg. They groan at my work, but would they rather be broken, crippled? Those I have spoken to tell me of the pain, but could they see themselves? They would see perfection. This piece of world building is entirely missable, requiring the player to find a specific book in Orton Teig to unlock it in their codex. Reading this prior to meeting Caradin provided me with a deeper understanding and context of the situation, making the decision to destroy the anvil upon which they were made all the more easy for me. The world's deities, the Maker, the Elven Pantheon, the Old Gods, and even the Avar spirits all felt tangible. The story of Andraste and the Maker was particularly engaging, especially during the Urn of Sacred Ashes questline. What intrigued me most was the overlap between these mythologies. Fen'Harel's imprisonment of the Elven gods within the Fade hints at a shared cosmology, further reinforced by the revelation that the Old Gods serve as archdemons at the heart of each blight. These connections suggest that the world's religions aren't mutually exclusive, but rather intertwined. World building in any RPG can feel overwhelming, especially in the first entry of a new franchise, but BioWare struck a delicate balance, giving just enough context to engage without overwhelming. Instead of feeling lost, I became a detective, piecing together codex entries, NPC dialogue, and environmental clues to uncover deeper truths. By the end, I felt like Charlie Day in It's Always Sunny, connecting dots on a red string board, desperate to unearth secrets the developers may have hidden in plain sight. Finally, I have to talk about the score, masterfully composed by Enon Zur. I'm prone to hyperbole, but I genuinely believe this isn't just his greatest work, it's one of the most exquisite collections of fantasy music I've ever experienced. Even now, just a month after finishing the game, the opening theme stirs a bittersweet concoction of melancholy, nostalgia, and longing within me. Trying to decide a favorite track feels akin to choosing a favorite child. If I were forced to decide, it would undoubtedly have to be Liliana's song. A snippet of it played at the end of my Dalish Origin, and after completing the game, I sought out the full version. Listening to it was pure catharsis. As the melody unfolded, I could vividly picture every step of my journey through Ferelden, safe in the knowledge that if I were to hear this song again in a year or a decade, those cherished memories would come flooding back to me. For a world to feel alive, it needs to be populated by grounded, believable characters, and Dragon Age Origins delivers on this in spades. The NPCs we encounter throughout Thedas fit seamlessly into its world, enhancing its immersion and depth. I could sit here for hours discussing minor characters and their related stories and quests. When drafting this script, I found myself jotting down dozens of names that left a lasting impression, proving just how rich and varied the game's cast truly is. What keeps the characters from feeling stale or overly familiar is their diversity of personalities. Take Heron and Wade and Denerim, for example. Heron manages their shop with pragmatic precision, while Wade, a passionate blacksmith, channels all of his energy into perfecting his craft. Their exaggerated dynamic felt like something a dungeon master might inject into a tabletop role-playing game to add levity, a touch I greatly appreciated by the time I met them. Characters like Heron and Wade wouldn't work nearly as well if not for the solid foundation provided by the rest of the NPCs. Thedas feels lived in because every location offers a handful of standout characters to interact with, each contributing to the world's texture. When it came to my companions, I don't think any of them were poorly written, but I certainly had my favorites, not so favorites, and Oghren. Yeah, let's address the elephant in the room. I didn't like Oghren. His backstory is undeniably tragic, and I can sympathize with him, but his personality was, to put it lightly, grating. I found myself not enjoying the inter-party banter whenever he was present, so he remained at camp forevermore. Some companions, however, left a profound impact. Sten, for instance, offered a fascinating glimpse into a culture far removed from Ferelden. His stoicism and devotion to the Qun made every interaction feel weighty and intriguing. Completing his personal quest by recovering his sword was particularly memorable, not just for the closure it brought him, but for the rare, fleeting smile it elicited. Something anyone who has traveled with Sten knows is no small feat. Wynne didn't spend as much time in my party, but still managed to leave a lasting impression. Her grandmotherly dynamic with Alistair was charming, but one moment stood out above all. Wynne revealed that she had had a son, taken from her because the Chantry claims all children of Circle Mages as their property. When asked if she thought of him all these years later, her simple response of "all the time" absolutely broke my heart. It's a moment that stayed with me and made me wish I'd brought her along a little bit more often. Then we have Shale, an intriguing character from the start, but one whose depth truly shines in the Deep Roads. Meeting the Paragon Caradin reveals that Shale was once Shale of House Kadash, the only woman transformed into a golem. Reflecting on this grim truth, Shale says, "The truth is that whatever gender I was is irrelevant now. I am a golem. I have no gender. It will not become an issue." This moment of self-awareness and acceptance was an unexpected yet welcome touch of representation, proof that RPGs can tackle identity and self-discovery in ways that don't require world-shattering events to transpire. Rounding out my party were Zevran and Leliana, both rogues who ensured I never lacked lock-picking skills. I do wish there had been alternative ways to open chests, perhaps by smashing them open with a two-handed weapon, but thankfully, bringing a rogue along never felt like a chore. Zevran, originally sent to assassinate me on Loghain's orders, became a flirtatious yet dependable ally. His personal quest culminated in a confrontation with Taliesin, who offered to take Zevran back to Antiva. Because I'd invested time into building trust with Zevran, he rejected the offer. The fact that he could have betrayed me added a real sense of stakes to our bond, precisely the kind of consequence-driven storytelling that I crave in RPGs. Leliana, meanwhile, added another layer of complexity to my party. Her thick Orlesian accent and fascinating backstory made her a standout. If you skip Dane's refuge in Lothering, you miss your chance to recruit her entirely. A staggering thought given how much she contributed to my playthrough. While her quest involving Marjolaine was gripping, the real joy of Leliana lay in learning about her life in Orlais and what brought her to Ferelden. Finally, my two favourite companions by far, Alistair and Morrigan. I dare say they're among the best written characters I've ever encountered in any role-playing game. Alistair, as I alluded to earlier, initially struck me as little more than comic relief. His quips felt almost at odds with the dark tone of the game, and I didn't expect to enjoy his character as much as I did, but as the game unfolded, his mask slipped, revealing a shy, vulnerable man struggling under the weight of responsibility and the scars of a troubled past. Watching him grow into a true hero was one of the most rewarding aspects of my playthrough. When his royal lineage was revealed, I was determined not to repeat the mistakes of those who had controlled his fate before. His reluctance to take the throne was precisely what made him the right choice. His altruism, kind heart, and charisma made him a perfect candidate to lead Ferelden into a new era. Origins offers a range of possibilities for Alistair's fate. He can rule alone, alongside Honora, remain with the Grey Wardens, or even fall into despair as a drunkard. For me, seeing him become king felt like the culmination of his arc. A reluctant follower transformed into a leader worthy of the crown. Morrigan, by contrast, is a study in contradictions. Intelligent yet vulnerable, cruel yet selfless. Raised in isolation by Flemeth, she was molded into a tool for her mother's ambitions, never shown kindness or love. One of my favourite moments with her was when she recounted venturing beyond the wilds in animal form and stealing a jewelled mirror from a noblewoman, only for Flemeth to destroy it. Later, I gifted her a replica of that mirror. Despite everything, a piece of that young, impressionable girl she once was still remained. Our relationship blossomed, and it gave me a glimpse of the softer side Morrigan rarely showed. But as with all things in Origins, there was a caveat. She warned me that I'd get hurt, perhaps a defense mechanism against the pain she'd expected. Her plan came to light with the Dark Ritual. Despite my doubts, I chose to trust her, believing she would honor her word and protect the child that she would bear to save the world. After the final battle, she fled, but the epilogue revealed a lingering connection. The ring she had given me remained on her finger, and I felt her thoughts, regret, sorrow, and a lingering bond. In the Witch Hunt DLC, she admitted she'd known I'd come for her. In that final moment, I vowed to stand by her and protect our son. It was a bittersweet, fitting conclusion to our story. This dynamic with Alistair and Morrigan encapsulates what makes Origins companions so remarkable. They're not just party members, they're characters with depth, agency, and arcs that rival those of the main story. To turn our eyes to the game's combat, I've always found joy in grinding through difficult encounters and boss fights, testing my patience and learning through trial and error. But that joy hinges on one crucial factor. The battles themselves need to be fun. As someone who's completed several challenge runs in the Souls series and tackled games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity Original Sin 2 on their highest difficulty settings, it's safe to say that I like a challenge. So when I began playing the game, I chose hard difficulty. Early on, it felt appropriately challenging. Every encounter required strategy, planning, and careful management of resources. But as the game progressed, something shifted. About halfway through, combat became less about strategy and more about playing a frantic game of whack-a-mole. Instead of whacking moles, though, I was frantically feeding potions to my companions, whose health bars were rapidly plummeting. Eventually, I decided to lower the difficulty to casual. It wasn't an easy decision, but the frequency and tedium of the battles was wearing me down. I'd derive far more enjoyment from the story and characters than from cutting down my 100th Hurlock in yet another trip through the deep roads. That's not to say the combat is bad, it simply wasn't to my tastes. In fact, the talent system is well designed, offering a wealth of options across all of the game's classes and specializations. Though I didn't get to experiment with everything, I was particularly impressed by the spell synergies. Combining different spells for devastating effects felt fresh and innovative, reminiscent of games like Final Fantasy IX, where Vivi and Steiner could team up to imbue weapons with magic, or EverQuest 2 with its Ascension combo system. The combat also carries a distinct sense of brutality. The inclusion of friendly fire in most offensive spells adds a layer of complexity that's rare in modern RPGs. For my heavily melee-oriented party, this meant Morrigan's arsenal of destructive elemental magic often felt like a liability. Any attempt to rain fire and ice on our enemies was hindered by the risk of turning my allies into collateral damage. It's not impossible to work around though. Careful positioning, crowd control, and tactical planning can turn even the hardest of encounters into manageable skirmishes. Still, as much as I appreciated these nuances, I couldn't bring myself to stick with it. The story, world building, and character interactions were where I found my joy, and I was content to let combat fade into the background as a means to an end. That said, the game's boss encounters stood out as a clear highlight. The battle with the High Dragon atop the mountain is one such example. I was still playing on hard difficulty at that point, and though it took several attempts, finally defeating it was a triumphant moment. Watching Alistair deliver the final blow in slow motion felt immensely satisfying. A moment where the grind and frustration melted away, replaced by pure exhilaration. Overall, the combat in Origins is serviceable, but far removed from the kind I truly enjoy in RPGs. That's not to diminish its appeal though. During my playthrough, I heard from plenty of viewers who adored the tactical depth and complexity, finding satisfaction in the minutiae of even the most routine encounters. For them, the very aspects I found tedious are a source of delight, a testament to how well this system can resonate with the right audience. To circle back to my initial question, 14 years later, does Dragon Age Origins hold up? I think it's fair to say that Origins stands as a cornerstone of modern RPGs. Without it, I doubt we'd have masterpieces like Baldur's Gate 3, which are redefining the genre in their own right. Countless times throughout my playthrough, I caught myself thinking, this feels like I'm playing Baldur's Gate if it had launched on decade-old hardware. The similarities are undeniable, from the cozy familiarity of returning to camp, where your companions wait in their usual spots, loyal, four-legged friend included, to the intricate branching dialogues. Origins delivers a level of consequence-driven storytelling that few modern RPGs can rival. That's not to say Origins is flawless. Some aspects haven't aged as gracefully. The combat can feel clunky by today's standards, and certain dialogue options lack the nuance we've come to expect from newer games. The visuals, while occasionally striking, serve as a reminder of its age. Its 15th anniversary is just around the corner. That said, the art direction itself holds up remarkably well, providing a timeless charm that elevates the experience beyond the limitations of its technical fidelity. Where Origins truly shines is in its story, and that magic hasn't dimmed with time. Whether you're saving the world from the Blight, navigating a romance with your sharp-tongued apostate girlfriend, or uncovering ancient secrets, every moment in Thedas feels purposeful. It's the kind of experience that lingers long after the credits roll. Even as I write this, I feel the pull to dive back in, to explore a different origin, assemble a new team, and make entirely different choices, just to see how the world reacts. That's the hallmark of a truly great RPG, its ability to draw you back time and time again, with the promise of new stories and fresh perspectives. And honestly, I think I might just do that. If you've never played Origins or haven't revisited it in years, I think you should too. Because games like this remind us of just why we love RPGs. They show us the beauty of choice, the depth of character, and the magic of a world that feels alive. Dragon Age Origins is more than a game. It's a journey, one worth taking, even now. thank you for watching. This is the first video of this kind I've ever made, so if you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd engage with the video by leaving a like, dropping a comment, or if you'd like to see more content like this, subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world to me.